Hello everyone, you're listening to the Eiffel Tower podcast. My name's Oliver G. This is a show all about sort of figuring out France, figuring out Paris, a little bit of tourist tips in there, a little bit of understanding the French, a big mix of all that kind of stuff. And today you're going to hear about something particularly relevant when it comes to the idea of French identity. I'm talking to a friend of mine who literally has just become French. He's an Australian guy. His name's Sam Davies. More on him in a minute. First, I want to say this show is brought to you by French Today. They are audiobooks that will help you learn French. I've been working with them this whole year, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about them at the end of the episode. But just before, if you want to get 10%, and when I say 10%, I mean a further 10% off all of their audiobooks, go to frenchtoday.com/earful7. 7 for the 7th month of the year, which is exactly where we are. But more on them later. A little bit more about Sam Davies. He's an Australian guy. You're going to hear his whole story, but we were sitting in the Parc Villemin in Paris on a really beautiful day, overlooking the Canal Saint-Martin, which he talks about. He's been living there for years. He gives his tips for the area at the end of the episode. But what we focused more on was his journey of becoming French and the sort of ups and downs and, the reasons why he did it, the difficult questions that they can ask you, all that kind of stuff, straight from the horse's mouth, the guy who's done it. So if you have any questions for him specifically, you can go and follow him on Twitter. His name is @SamXDavies, Davies, and he also has a fairly new blog called samwhere.com, SAMWHERE.com. That's how you can find him if you want more. But let me transport you to the Parc Villemin in the 10th arrondissement. Let's do it. All right, Sam, how are you?
Hi, Ollie. I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm pretty well. We've picked a very warm day to be sitting out in the sun.
Yeah, well, I've got a giant cowboy hat on, which is a bit uncommon here, but...
I was going to ask you about that. It's not very normal in Paris that people wear such eccentric anything.
It's just my...
Is it a fashion week thing?
It's just my endless pursuit of being recognised for who I am, Ollie.
Speaking of this, you bring up an interesting point right off the bat. Who you are.
Right off the hat.
Right off the hat. Who are you is changed recently since you've become
Going
French.
through transition.
Right.
Transitioning. Well, this is true, and I've actually just come back half an hour ago from the passport office, and the reason is that despite being an Australian and Brit who's been living here for 12 years, as of about December last year, I became French. So I've been going through the bureaucratic and mental process of that transition over the last 2 years.
And so something I want to talk to you over the next sort of 20-25 minutes is the bureaucracy.
It's going to be a good 25 minutes.
I want to go through that kind of, if it's as difficult as everyone thinks it is. I want to talk about becoming French and the kind of nightmare scenarios a lot of people think that involves with the tests and all that. But also how it feels for you to essentially wake up one day as a Frenchman, and seemingly we're friends off camera as well. I know that you like to mention it. Do you feel any different?
Well, it's the easiest thing to achieve, really. You just wake up. It's like having a birthday. It's just that one day, and suddenly everyone's got to congratulate you. So, look, I think I'll give you some background first. So, I never wanted to become French. I don't feel a particular strong affinity with France. I'm here because I like it. It's a convenient place to live. I've got good friends like yourself and a lot of others. It's a really strong sense of community, and it's a really cosmopolitan vibe, and there's a great food and wine culture. So, look, there's a lot of positives, but having said that, I just never felt a cultural affinity or a personality-wise, I never felt like it was a strong fit with myself. That said, I've been living here and working thanks to a British passport, and when the Brexit vote happened, I suddenly realised that was the right to remain in Europe was suddenly under a cloud, and for many of us British in Europe, it still is. So I suddenly realised I'd had to cover my bases, and by that stage I was eligible for French nationality because I'd been here more than 5 years. I had all the proof of having worked and paid tax here, and so I started to put together the dossier. One of the reasons I'd also put off applying was because I had heard that it is just an absolute nightmare, the paperwork. Every time someone talks about getting a titre de séjour...
and what is that for the non...
Well, I've never had one, but usually if you're American, for example, then you'd need it's basically, I think it's a form of residency permit. You need it renewed every year or 5 years or something. And for that, you have to go to the town hall. You have to like people are lining up from 3 a.m. and you waste an entire day. It just sounds...
A lot of Americans talk about. I think they have to do it. Did you say every year? Is it?
Sometimes I think it's every year.
Right, and that tends to be what Americans complain about a lot when it comes to French administration.
It just sounds awful. So I've always been happy that I've never had to do that. But I'd heard horror stories about putting together the naturalisation application. As it happened, I just went to the website and they have quite a clear list of documents to do. And then for the next 2 months or so, I set about getting my parents' birth certificate, getting my own, their marriage certificate, getting my birth certificate, getting these documents translated by an official translator. You can't just Google Translate it.
So when I've gone through this before. For, I think when I set up a social security or something here, I can't remember exactly, but that there are little, and I wonder if you found this as well. There are little things that can mess you up. For example, getting that official translation. I got that. But you also needed to get an apostille, which is like it's like to make sure your birth certificate is internationally recognized or something like that. Is that what?
Yeah, well, it's basically a seal of authenticity.
Right. So when I got mine translated, the official translator didn't translate the apostille.
Yeah.
So they didn't translate the backside of my birth certificate, and I had to go through the whole process again.
Yeah, I've got a little theory about official translators, and that's that they just phone in the job completely. Myself, having worked in translation, but not as an officially registered one, I found myself having to proofread her translation, and she spelt my parents' name wrong, got like the place of birth, their place of birth wrong, and all these things. And so I said, look, what are you doing? And it's costing a lot. They charge a premium for their registered service. So
what is it, like 100 euros per page or something like that?
Oh, it's something like that. Yeah.
And I've always thought the birth certificate translation is the easiest job ever.
Like once you've got a template of like the 5 or 10 most common birth and marriage certificates, then surely she's just plugging in, she or he is just plugging in the different names and addresses. I mean, can't be that hard. Anyway, that aside, that was probably the hardest bit. Cost-wise, it's pretty cheap. I think it's, I can't remember now. It's only a couple of €100, if that, compared to Australia, where it's, $10,000 Australian. I mean, €7,000, and it's huge.
And I can only imagine it's very difficult to get American or many other citizenships around the world as well, in terms of cost.
Yeah, exactly. Prohibitively, it's a lot of them are prohibitive. So I was really pleasantly surprised that France was so accessible. In the end, the hardest thing was just the waiting time. So I submitted mine in May 2017. Then June 2018, you have the famous meeting.
This is what I'm very curious about. But we'll get back to that. So that's a year before you get the meeting.
It's a year. So a year between submitting the dossier. And because of Brexit, it just happened that the day I submitted it, I read a newspaper article that there was an 800% increase in people from Britain submitting applications. So I just knew that my application was at the bottom of a very, very tall pile.
Yeah.
I think if you submit them outside, hot tip, if you submit it outside of Paris, I think it goes faster.
Right.
And also if you can claim it through marriage, if you've married a French man or woman, that also tends to go a lot faster.
So this has been something in our mutual circle of friends and beyond. You've probably noticed a lot of other expats who are specifically dealing with the Brexit sort of shambles are scrambling for different ways to get French citizenship, or leaving it alone and sort of chancing it. Is there some kind of trend that you're noticing among the people that you...
Well, anyone who's even so much as flown over Ireland has put an application for Irish citizenship. But that's incredibly easy if you've got a grandparent or maybe it's only a parent. But that happens very fast. It happens within a matter of weeks. So Irish is the easiest and most common claim my friends have been making. Otherwise, marriage. Got 2 friends who've got claim to marriage.
Which, to be fair, is why a lot of people end up moving to France, especially, a lot of foreigners end up here.
This is a reverse green card scenario.
All right. But let's talk about this meeting.
The quiz.
Yeah, this quiz, I think, is one of the most interesting things about becoming French. And there are a lot of rumors flying around.
Yeah.
I've heard that some people have cheat sheets that they send to each other with the potential questions you get asked, that they're going to grill you on the 90 past prime ministers and presidents, things like, that's an exaggeration, but...
Only a slight one.
Is this something that you heard about going in, and did it worry you?
Well, it did initially. When I submitted the application, I started to hear about this famous culture and values and general knowledge test, basically. And I looked online and I downloaded this, or paid for this pack of 300 questions. And I was really excited and started going through all the questions. And it's all this rote learning stuff, like who was Clovis, first king of France, what year was women's suffrage, blah, blah, blah. All these names and dates and people. Pretty arcane stuff that, in terms of general knowledge, is, you'd say, fairly irrelevant in this age of Google. But having said that, I was really excited, and so I downloaded this test. But in the space of the year it took between submitting the dossier and then getting the meeting, I'd actually forgotten completely about the quiz and what all my passwords were for accessing the questions. So I turned up to the meeting, and I had this very nice lady, and she's looking through my dossier, and there was a few things I'd done incorrectly. You have to submit every single address you've lived in France, and I mean every single one.
Really?
Yeah.
So you said 12 years you've been here.
Yeah.
Oh my.
So I mean, I haven't, she's like, you were living in Montpellier. What address? I'm like, I don't know. You have to get police record, but I'd had that, so that was fine. And lo and behold, it was also clean, so that was a turn up for the books.
Unlike all your apartment.
Yeah. So anyway, and then she goes, well, why do you love France so much?
So this is pre-quiz or?
Well, I wasn't sure what the process was. I was just there to see what she wanted in this. I was there she was going to go through my dossier. So she goes, why do you love France so much? And of course, I may have prepared 300 other questions, but I hadn't prepared for that one.
Right.
And so I've said, being Australian, I'm like, I was completely put on the spot. And I thought, the war, because, Australian and France, we had this big fighting relationship. We fought alongside each other in the trenches.
That was the first thing.
That was the first thing that came to my mind.
Why you love?
Yeah, because I love war so much.
But you were sort of trying to please her with a nice answer.
Well, it was the first connection that came to mind between Australia and France.
Like, we're allies.
Yeah, we're allies.
Let me.
And then I said, no, actually, it's literature. I really love French literature. And then I thought, gee, what have I got myself into here? I hope she doesn't ask me who my favourite classic French author is. I could basically get, I was thinking, like,
Daft
for me,
Punk.
yeah, Les Miserables, wasn't that written by Russell Crowe and Anne Hathaway?
That would have been a good answer, though. You got Russell Crowe and Hugh Jackman in Les Mis.
Yeah, I know. Maybe if I have to resubmit my application for whatever reason, I'll say that. And then I got onto safer ground. And then I said, no. Actually, it's food and wine. Food and wine. I love the food and wine culture. And then she starts to nod her head, and she can start to agree. And then I said, actually, it's also Brexit. And that's when she just gave me a smile, and I knew that she knew that the reason that I was there was also Brexit. But that was it for me. I had to submit another document after that, a tax form, which I just emailed through, really easy. And then she said, right, we'll be in touch. And 6 months later, I got an email saying my dossier had been accepted.
So you never had to go through any tricky quiz?
Well, the trickiest question was, why do you love France so much? But it's only after I got my application accepted that I started to hear the horror stories.
Right.
And I think my theory is that because I'm tall, white, Anglo, fairly handsome guy, like, I wasn't really posing much of a threat.
You're lucky it's radio.
yeah, I know, right. Whereas other friends we've got one friend from Sri Lanka, for example, and she got grilled. I mean, her questions were, name 5 former prime ministers, name 5 former presidents.
So you didn't get any of those kind of questions? Not any?
Not one.
Really?
Not one.
What happened with her?
Well, she'd also screwed up her dates, so she got hers rejected.
She got hers rejected, but do you know it was because of the dates?
Well, she submitted her... She got hers rejected, and she made the cardinal sin in France of not checking official information 3 times with 3 different people. And so she'd spoken to the receptionist about... And because you have to be here 5 years before you can submit a dossier, she had submitted hers at 4.5 years, and the receptionist said, well, by the time we get to your dossier, it'll be 5 years, so you would have done your time. But lo, when she had the meeting with the actual woman doing the interview, the woman said, well, you submitted this after 4.5 years, so what gives? So that was a sad story, and she's since resubmitted her application, so she just has to wait now.
Well, we have another mutual friend, Mike, who's probably listening to this, and he was telling me some of his stories. So he went through the path of marriage.
Yep.
As in, he's married to a French woman, and he was grilled on some of the unusual questions, including, to give you guys at home an example, they asked him to name the dom-toms, they're called. It's French for the département outre-mer and the territoire. Yeah, so essentially the overseas territories of France, which are, well, I don't need to know. You need to know. You should know.
Well, I don't need to know anymore. I've forgotten.
But it's
this
like
has gone into the dustbin of my mind, Ollie.
Guadeloupe,
Guyane,
Mauritius,
Réunion.
Yeah, so it's essentially he had to list them, but also I thought quite interesting was he was interviewed separately from his wife, and when his wife was in there alone, they said, have you been forced to be here? And they apparently there are a lot of people that she essentially tried to get her to confide in her, and she was really surprised by that, his wife. So there's a lot going on behind those closed doors.
Well, and it can be quite unfair. I mean, there's another girl from Serbia, I believe, who had also encountered the same nightmare interviewee. She'd been asked to name 5 current ministers.
Now, 5 current...
Yeah, but the rub was that this was 1 week after Macron had been elected, and they were...
That's ridiculous.
That's awful.
Really? That's
I wouldn't have been able to do that, and I'm
Macron
a journalist.
He
didn't even name them.
Didn't he pick his ministers like willy-nilly from all over the place?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, he probably wouldn't have been able to. That is difficult, but these are the horror stories that you do hear. There are a lot of difficult questions, and you hear a lot of people sort of trying to learn, not just... I mean, the common one I keep hearing is the common one, and maybe you can help me remember a few of the common ones. 5 past presidents.
Yep. All prime ministers, I think.
All prime ministers. One is the Devi, I think it's called, of Paris or France. No, the
Liberty, Égalité, yeah.
Is it the word Devi?
I think so,
like the motto of France. Liberty, Égalité, Beyoncé.
Yeah.
As I saw written on...
Mbappe,
the footballer. Do you remember any of the other
yes,
common ones?
Yes, women's suffrage. The date of women's suffrage.
Which, of course, is...
in the 60s. I wouldn't. If you'd have been my interviewer, Ollie, I would have failed. I'd still be just an Australian bum in Paris.
I think there's, for me personally. So I've been here about 4.5 years. I'm in a similar boat to you, in terms of I'm here on a British passport.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that it could be a good idea to get French citizenship when 5 years comes around.
Well, what you could do is start getting those documents together. They do say that when you submit them, they need to be no less than 3 or 6 months since you've procured them. But
right.
I think there's maybe some leniency. But yeah, I as soon as you're approaching that 5-year mark, I'd just be ready to go to pull the trigger on that day. Because, as I said, there's at least a 2-year wait before.
Crazy.
I've just submitted my application for the passport this morning, and that's going to be another 2 weeks. So from submitting the dossier to actually having in my hot little hands an identity card and a passport, that's going to be 26 months.
Wow, that's insane. What about the language? Did they test your language?
Well, the whole interview's in. Well, as part of the dossier, you have to submit a certificate that you've got a certain level of language. It's not even that great, not that high a level. I think it's B2, which is basically being able to talk in the past tense.
Well, so B2, the way it works is there's A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. And you can consider C2 to be essentially very fluent. Not necessarily native, but very fluent. And A1 is sort of ordering a coffee.
A1's basically saying your name and saying, sorry, excuse my French.
Yeah. So there you go. So B1 is probably enough to have that interview that you went through.
Yeah. Look, I'm C2, but I've since hanging out with Australians like yourself, I've definitely gone back to about an A, somewhere hovering between an A2 and a B1. No offence to your own perfect level of French, Ollie.
Oh, goodness. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to touch on before we talk a little bit about Paris and the Canal, because I realise some people are probably here just for Paris tips. Yeah. And you've got some things to say about
that. Doozies. Yeah.
But I like the idea personally of becoming French. I sort of have a choice. I'm very fortunate that I could push for French or Swedish citizenship, as my wife is Swedish. But I like the idea of getting the French one, especially jumping through the hoops, because it feels like you earn it. Whereas in Sweden, it seems to me you just tick a box. Did you have a kind of similar feeling?
Look, as I said earlier, I never wanted to become French, but there is a very special feeling. And for me, one of the things I was very tempted to do, but in the end chickened out, was they offer you to Francify your name. So I was then...
They offer you to Frank...
Well, you have the option of Francifying your name. So I was thinking, do I become Sam de France, or like go for it and like Saint-Exupéry de Alexandre de...
What do you mean you can just change it? Do you mean like when
It seems to be you can just put in an application to change your name and give yourself something
is it like when,
outrageously French.
Chinese and Japanese people call themselves like Bubble?
Bruce
or,
and...
Yeah. No, but even wild, like Candy.
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I could have done the same. I could have been called Bonbon, maybe. Bonbon de France.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So I was a bit annoyed at myself I didn't take that option. But look, to return back to what does it feel like to be French? Look, I was really proud actually, and I am really proud because, as you say, I did earn it. I feel like it's not always an easy life in France. It's challenging for a lot of different ways, and I'm like, well, I've got the right. I've paid my tax. I've paid my dues in this country, and I've earned it. And next time, and the other thing is, on the question of assimilation, I mean, I see a lot of people desperately trying to be French, and I long ago became quite happy just being an Australian living in France. And if French people are happy to have my tax and have me in the community, then that's good enough for me. I don't see why I should pretend to be otherwise. I pay respect to the country in the ways that you should, but I'm very happy with my own identity here, and I have a very strong sense of my own identity, and it's as a European now, and a European Australian. It's not French. And also the best thing about being French is now I can insult my fellow countrymen with impunity, and I'm not being racist because I'm French.
Is that the first thing you did when you became French?
Well, it was, and then my brother said, "Well, how is that different? You've been doing that for 12 years." So I said, "Yeah, but now I'm French."
Good answer. There you go, Sam. Now, thanks for all the info, and I hope you guys at home found it useful. But here's some stuff that's perhaps more practical for every single person listening. And I want to talk about the Canal Saint-Martin, which is where we're sitting. So we're sitting in the Parc Villemin, which is a sort of, I'd use the word undulating.
Oh yeah, very undulating. Lots of knolls. If there's any American presidents passing through, they should be very, very careful in this park.
And it's a park that's traditionally, or typically when it's very warm, it's just absolutely rammed with people.
Well, I'm surprised today because when I've known this park for 12 years, it was close to where I first worked here. And when I used to come here for lunch all those years ago, it was full of Hazari refugees. And I mean, there was almost 100 typically young men who'd always be here in the park during the day. And I'm looking today and can't see anyone. So I'm not sure whether that's changed or whatnot, but that for me was always a strong impression I had of this park. So it was always a meeting place for the refugees.
Well, that's interesting that you bring it up because the whole canal has changed a lot. And I've heard, neither of us have been here 20 years, but I hear that 20 years ago no one would even set foot along this canal. But just paint a little bit of a quick picture of what we're looking at now. Beautiful day, greenery everywhere, fancy shops and cafes along both sides. We can see them off to the distance.
There's a lot of business schools springing up. It's really a place where young French restaurateurs come to try new concepts. Honestly, this has got some of the most exciting food in Paris for me. There's very few bistros, but what you do have, there's a lot of Korean, there's vegan, there's a vegan Chinese, it's a vegetarian Chinese. There's a fresh poke place. There's a lot of cool little, really nice bars. There's some great cafes serving Australian-style coffee.
Specialty coffee.
Specialty coffee. Sorry.
But what's interesting is there's not, like someone emailed me once and they said I want to go and I want to go and see this. They were emailing from abroad. They wanted to see the sights of the canal in the 11th place, and I didn't know what to say to them.
It's the ambience, it's the atmosphere of the canal. Like in any summer day, there's always hundreds of people sitting on the side of the canal, which is always dirty. So bring a rug or something,
or a deck chair.
Or a deck chair, which I've got deck chairs now. I bring them down. Everyone thinks I'm amazing for bringing deck chairs. I'm like, why has no one else done this? I just do not understand why people don't bring deck chairs down.
So listeners at home, if you're ever walking along the canal and you see a man with some kind of outrageous hat on, or anyone indeed sitting on a deck chair, say hello. It could just be Sam.
It might just be me.
But what I want to finish on, because time's ticking away, is on this idea of a tourist who's coming to Paris, and they decide they want to branch out from the typical tourist sites. You know, they're done with the Louvre, they're done with the Musée d'Orsay and the river, and they want to spend an afternoon down in the Canal Saint-Martin area. So paint a picture for how they should spend that afternoon.
Well, I'd definitely save about an hour to take the motorised boats up at the a bit further up the canal from where we are. You can take these boats and go up towards the Science Museum. It's just a beautiful, clean, and it's really relaxing and just fun, actually.
So that specifically is the Canal de l'Ourcq.
That's the Canal de l'Ourcq.
Which is it's the connection to the Saint-Martin.
Exactly.
So there's 1 hour. Are we starting with that? Are we finishing with that?
It depends the time of day, but I'd start at one end and just mosey on down. I'd probably end up at that end. If you were down here, there's some great shops. The Rue Marseille has some really, really great clothing shops for men and women. They've just opened a weekdays there, I saw this week. There's 2 fantastic bakeries, my 2 all-time favourite bakeries in Paris.
Name them.
Well, there's the classic Pain et des Idées, which I'm sure your listeners are familiar with. But there's a new one. This is a hot tip. It's been open about less than 6 months. It's called Sain, S-A-I-N, which means healthy. And it's 1 block behind the Cork and Cavern, so near the Carillon, on Rue Marie and Louisa. And that has the most amazing croissant I've ever tasted in Paris. And It's because he uses non-GMO flour based on a traditional grain. He uses natural yeast. And you can really taste the difference. It has this honey sweetness with each bite, and honestly, it's brilliant. And the bread is fantastic. It has all these really interesting breads. I bought a beetroot and anchovy loaf the other day and gave it to some vegetarians because I'd forgotten that it had anchovies in it. So apologies to that person. You know who you are.
I think your description of that croissant and bread would be enough to get you French citizenship if nothing else works out. But okay, so we've got bakeries, we've got restaurants, and just clothing and a long old mosey down the canal.
Yeah.
It's not about the tourist sites. It's not about taking the pictures. It's more about the
well, it's very picturesque. And there are people who do take pictures, but honestly, it's about the eating, the outdoor eating and drinking. Hotel du Nord looks great. Probably, it's a great ambience there. It's a beautiful old Art Deco style hotel.
And we can give a shout out to 10 Bells Cafe where we're drinking one of the coffees from there.
We are indeed. And these nice iced lattes.
Yeah. So there you go, 10 Bells as well. Thanks for having us. There you go. That's plenty of tips, guys. I think we can wind up on that. Sam, thanks for meeting me on this park bench.
Yeah, well, it's where I'm going to spend the rest of my afternoon now that I'm French, Ollie. So
enjoy it.
I will. Nice talking to you.
Well, there you have it. That was Sam Davies talking about how he became French. I'm sure, I'll just stress it one more time, I'm sure there are a lot of different stories for a lot of different people depending on what country you come from. Do your research. Don't just trust me and Sam and what we talk about because, as he said, it can be very complicated. But best of luck to everybody else that's going down a similar path. And thanks, Sam, for sharing your time with me. Now, I'm going to jump into a little bit of French today, but first, a review. It's been a long time since I read a review on this show. I figured, I got a nice one the other day, and I thought I'd read it out and give a little reminder. If there's one thing you take away from this episode, I guess I kind of do this once a season now, but leave a little review because, well, they say that it helps people find the show. It looks good if there's some 5-star reviews in there, I suppose. I'm not really sure how it helps, but I'd love it if you left one anyway. So I'm going to read out this one from Davey Pockstar in Canada. 5 stars, says Davey. And he says that this podcast is for those who love Paris, and then in capitals, really love Paris. So the review goes, I've forgotten how I discovered this podcast, but I'm so glad I did. Great content here by the host Oliver G, whose voice and accent is so palatable that I look forward to hearing episodes every week. Palatable. There's one that I haven't heard before, palatable. But he's really good at painting a story with audio that I oftentimes feel like I'm on location with him when he does on-site episodes. Keep it up, Ollie. Using the familiar Ollie there, Davey, just like Sam was. I hope you enjoyed that one on site. I think a lot of you listeners out there may have noticed that I've been taking the microphone out, going on site a lot more. enjoying your feedback for you guys who appreciate that, and even for those who don't like it, let me know. Should I keep doing it? Should I go back in the studio? Leave a review. Keep those coming. Now I want to get over to French today, and what I'm going to do, in case you don't know, they're audiobooks. They're the sponsor of this show, and I've been going through the audiobooks over the whole year, sort of learning stuff, sharing it with you at the end of the episodes. Sometimes Camille, the voice from the audiobooks, comes into the studio and we talk as well. But what I figured I'd do after that chat with Sam and talking about A1, B1, all that kind of French, is I'd go right back to the start and I'd do one for you beginners there. So this is from Un Mois Paris level 1. So we're right back at the beginning. And I just thought I'd give an example of what Camille does to teach some of the basic stuff. So here's something really basic. How are you? Did you know, according to Camille, there are 3 main constructions of this old how are you using the verb aller, as in to go. You can say to someone, I'm sure you all have heard before, ça va, right? How are you? So Camille writes, you can say comment ça va, that's the proper way to say it. It's casual, very commonly used lately. It works for tu and vous and all the other subject pronouns as well. It's kind of like, how are things? You know, with you or with your work or with your mum. The second way you can say it, comment vas-tu? It's a bit less casual and uses the tu form. And then the third way you can say it is comment allez-vous? And that's what you use in the more formal. Note the liaison with the T of the comment. Comment allez-vous? Comment allez-vous? Not comment allez-vous, but it's comment vas-tu? So there you go. A little bit of a tip. From a personal perspective, I remember when I was learning French and the teacher taught us ça va. It just taught you how to say ça va. And then I thought I spoke a little bit of French. Someone came up to me one day and they said, comment allez-vous? And I thought, what the heck are they talking about? And my mind, it went to like, what's your name? You know, comment tu t'appelles, or comment vous appelez-vous? And I was like, why has this person just walked up and asked me my name? Anyway, I think I probably got that one messed up. That was many years ago now. But there's just a little typical example of something that you'll get from the audiobooks. If you want to do those audiobooks along with me, or indeed by yourself, it's called French Today. If you go to their website, frenchtoday.com/earful7, they give you a further 10% off. And what I mean by that is they often have sales on. Right now they have a 20% sale on. So go and check that out. You get a further 10% off. Buy the books, support the show, and learn French. What more could you ask for? I'll be back on Thursday with another episode. I'll talk to you then. Au revoir.